Hello, everyone. Welcome to a TCR Express, except it's not Express. It's going to be a little longer this time because I have three guests beside myself. National Managing Editor Vince Versace, staff writer Russell Hixson, and daily editor Lindsey Cole. And we're all going to talk about the election, which is, well, not quite concluded, but it's pretty close. It's conclusive. Let's put it that way.
No,
it's conclusive. That's a good word there, Warren.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Well, we know there's about a million. What was it? A million mail-in votes. A million votes that were sent out. Was it?
A million people requested mail-in votes. Not, I mean, probably not every single one will have done it. Who knows what came up? And then, of the ones who turned it in, they have to verify that that person didn't also vote in person. So it could take 4 days or so.
Considering the numbers we're looking at right now, go ahead, Warren. Yeah,
I was going to say the numbers we're looking at as of right now, which is just shy of 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern. Liberals 156, Cons 123, BQ 29, NDP 28, and Green 2. Nothing for PPC. So even if those million come in, how much are they going to really in effect?
Also, quick note: Annemie, the leader of the Green Party, was defeated in her bid to become an MP.
Which honestly, given all the infighting of that party, might be a good mercy way out for her. So she doesn't have to deal with any more of that nonsense.
Yeah, that might be true, and it might be time to just recalibrate and see priorities of that party to change things up for sure. But yes, on the grander scheme of things, we are speaking right now, sitting with a Liberal minority government. So what does that mean for our industry? Where do we go from here? Let's maybe talk some highlights that we as we saw the numbers unfold and some of the things that we discussed in our live stream that we did on Monday, Election Day, September 20th.
Just 10 minutes ago, really.
Yeah. Well, we know a couple of the key planks we covered in our reporting and we talked about in our live stream broadcast that the Liberals, what does a Liberal government mean for this industry, for construction? One, there's the $180 billion Investing in Canada infrastructure program to fund infrastructure for the long term, supporting high frequency rail as well along Quebec-Windsor corridor. I'll believe that when I see that. You know what I mean? The amount of times we've seen high-speed rail talked about out in the east. It's like how many times did we see a new waterfront Toronto plan in my lifetime get discussed, right? But cynicism aside,
we're gonna do it this time.
We're gonna do it. We got a plan, right? There's Liberals committed to providing $100 million top up to the Safe Return to Class Fund for ventilation improvement projects across Canada. Important considering the fact that we are in a pandemic. You know what I mean? We are dealing with a Delta variant and we are dealing with reality, and fear. And as a parent, of a child that's going to school, this is the type of thing that you want to hear about, you know what I mean, being done, or is it capable to be done? The Liberals also committed to $10 million for First Nations to improve indoor air quality in on-reserve schools. They also want to provide $100 million to the Canada Healthy Communities Initiative, with $70 million of the funding directed to a new pillar focused on increased air quality and indoor ventilation. And they also want to introduce a tax credit for small businesses to make it easier for them to invest in better ventilation. Once again, a lot of pandemic themed kind of stuff in that, but it has direct construction impacts, whether it's in renovation or new builds.
Yeah.
Right?
100%. I think on the labor spectrum, there was the labor mobility tax credit that they're looking at introducing. That's going to allow workers in the trades to deduct up to $4,000 in eligible travel. That's been a long standing item within Canada Building Trades Union's been vying for that. But what was unique in this election was that all parties seemed to commit to it one way or another. So now that we know it's a Liberal minority, it'll be interesting to see that finally rolled out, given the impending labor shortage and challenges that we have going on with the labor force there. So interesting to see that. They're going to double the union training and innovation program to $50 million a year to support more apprentices. So that means some additional partnership in the Red Seal trades. There's going to be connecting first-year apprentices with employers, some more initiatives on that front, which, if I'm in the construction industry and we report on it all the time, I would call it encouraging, given the the amount of discussions that have been had when it comes to how to bolster apprenticeships and careers in the skilled trades. So some labor endeavors there. So I thought that was kind of nice to see in their platform. Any other highlights that you guys saw?
Well, this kind of comes out of what we were talking about with our live stream, but I couldn't shake the image in my head of somebody who works for this Canadian Infrastructure Bank with the resume on their desk, opening their drawer and putting it right back in there, going, "Oh, I have a job tomorrow. Very good. Carry on."
That's a good point. That is a really good point. For context, the Conservatives had said that they were going, and the NDP, I believe, said that they were both going to scrap the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which we've been reporting on since its inception and since its thought was developed. So it's actually Aaron Corey, who was formerly from Infrastructure Ontario, is the current CEO there. And he's done, I would say he did a lot at IO, but he's also done a lot for the CIB. So that it still will remain intact, I'm sure, is quite a relief to some industry stakeholders.
Sure. Yeah, I think on the West Coast, we're going to see continued pressure on housing as the Lower Mainland, especially, continues to be incredibly unaffordable for a lot of people, and there's going to be continued pressure to build more housing or try and deal with that. I know one thing that he said he wants to do, Trudeau, the I guess apparent winner of the election, he's been projected, hasn't been all said and done, but it's looking like he's going to form minority government. He said he's going to freeze foreign buying, but that doesn't address kind of the supply issue. I mean, even if you don't have foreign investment or outside investment pouring into the Lower Mainland, that doesn't impact just new supply. People still, that demand for housing is still there. That's going to need to be addressed. I know on the prairies in Alberta, there's a lot of economic pain, and I think for a long time they felt that hasn't been addressed. With the decline of oil prices, with the pandemic, a lot of people are hurting, and they're looking for solutions. Which is one of two things: either you, or maybe both at the same time, I'm not sure. Either you try and strengthen the existing energy sector, or you help it transition into other things and diversify the economy and make sure people have jobs where they can feed their families. Yeah, I think that's on a lot of people's minds in our industry and beyond.
Kind of tacking on to that, Russ, is the whole platform that they presented regarding climate change and greening the economy and whatnot. So that kind of goes with what you're saying out west. Like, what does the future hold out there? What is the commitments for workers out there to help them retrain when it comes to new resource opportunities and all of these new initiatives that they highlighted in their platform, like getting to net zero and various carbon captures things and you name it. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on that I will be very interesting to see how they play out when it comes to the labor force out west.
Yeah, for sure. I know hydrogen is a thing that's been talked about a lot, and that ties in with LNG, which, I mean, I'm not a chemist, I'm not a scientific expert, but the processes are intertwined in some ways, and then the existing pipeline infrastructure, I believe, can be utilized for a lot of that stuff. But the thing too is there's a ton of opposition, especially further west in BC, to LNG, even as an interim kind of greener fuel. There's still a lot of opposition to that, but LNG, I believe, is utilized in some way in the process of making hydrogen. So that'll be interesting. Yeah, we'll just have to see what happens.
This might be a bit of a reach on my part, but Jason Kenney was widely seen as the favorite of industry in Alberta for sure. Definitely more friendly than the NDP, although the NDP government wasn't all that unfriendly to oil compared to other NDP governments across the country. Anyway, the point being, Jason Kenney may have been part of the reason the Conservatives didn't do as well here, even though he was at least favored by industry. So I wonder just how much of that affected this, Mm-hmm. And that's what we'll hear about in the days to come, because that's the new moving target.
Well, I think everything we just talked about was kind of pushed aside a little bit, and we refocused on the pandemic in the last few days of the election.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know if you all agree.
I do, and the interesting thing is, it didn't feel like it was by design by the Liberals. It seemed to be organic. You know what I mean? Because this thing is real. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden you had these premiers, like in particular, Kenny and Ford, who had to eat their words around the vaccine passports. Right? Yeah. Because the numbers are catastrophically awful, especially what's happening in those ICUs in Alberta.
The worst in all of Canada.
Worse, just awful. And there's strain here in Ontario, and that's how bad the Alberta is. You know what I mean? We don't even talk about what's happening here because that's how bad it is there.
Yeah.
All right.
And so not to be politically callous, but that it happened at exactly the worst time for the federal Conservatives.
Yeah, it did.
No, you're absolutely right.
You know, because we discussed this at length during the live broadcast. Russ brought it up at first. It's like the incumbent always has it tough because they get attacked on their record, right? On the track record. Interestingly, though, you can review that track record and you don't have to attack it if you're a voter, right? You kind of sit there. If you used CURB, or if you didn't, or you knew somebody who did, or if your business stayed afloat because of the help, you know what I mean? Like what's the point that? What could the opposition done differently? Sorry, trying to get that out, but you know, like you kind of sit there and go, I don't know. Because we never heard from them. I'm sorry, we're back to this again. We never categorically heard from O'Toole or Jagmeet what exactly they would have done differently.
Well, there wasn't like an easy political binary strategy where you can be like, do this or that. It was always, we're going to help Canadians. It's just to what degree, and kind of squabbling over kind of the details and this and that, which I don't think voters are that interested in.
Not at all. They want results. They want to know what's happening in the here and now. And they are, I think, in this case, showing that they're not that unhappy with what Trudeau did in a situation globally that nobody anticipated.
Yeah, it's a once in a lifetime threat. So what are you going to do? Probably vote the same guys.
I just think it's interesting that, yeah, exactly. And to Vince's point, there was no real even hard hitting solution that the opposition parties came up with that really they honestly, I don't know if they could have answered it, because they watched another leader have to deal with when the pandemic outbreaks were declared, when this whole country changed forever.
Well,
and yet nobody was.
Sorry, go ahead,
Warren. I was going to say, and yet nobody was all that enthusiastic about Trudeau either. Nobody was really rallying to his defense. They were just kind of like not opposing him. I mean, voters.
Well, and I think the voters, that shows we've got the exact same thing.
We got the numbers to show that.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what the pollsters and the survey groups. One area where they look at is the discourse and tenor of the campaign, and some of the stuff that we saw by the extreme right, the extreme people, that whether they're right or left, let's just not put them on the spectrum, the extreme voters or extremely disenchanted voter base, did that have anything to do with helping keep Trudeau and the Liberals in power? You know, did the Canadian electorate at some point kind of go, it's like, that is not us. We're not going to let this happen.
I think it did.
You know, I'm curious to see if I'm sure somebody's going to do some polling around that to see if it had, how much you believe the polls and the numbers. But, I think it's a valid question. It's beyond our scope as a construction industry publication and construction industry podcast.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to see what that says, because I think maybe something that maybe it did do something.
Maybe you got people that are very business friendly. They want to pay low taxes. They have a lot of conservative ideals, but when they see people screaming and throwing rocks about vaccines, they're like, "Whoa, that's not, no, thank you."
That's not the same thing. It's a completely different ballpark.
Sure, but I mean, I think I'm kind of speculating.
No, that's what I mean. Like I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying that's what they're thinking.
But I will say this. I mean, one of the closing pitches of the Conservatives was, "Look how much this election cost," which I think fell pretty flat. I mean, look what you could say that about almost anything in government and put a price tag on it that has millions next to it. And I mean, it's hard to conceptualize that. I mean, I think you're right. They needed some bold strategy, a bold critique, and also, like you said, a alternative saying, "Hey, this was done badly. This is a better path forward." And I think critiquing just the cost of a pandemic election, while people may agree and go, yeah, this wasn't a great time to have an election, that's a lot of money, I don't think that was enough to really move the needle the way they needed it to.
You know what? I didn't do the research on this, and I'm kicking myself for it. The critique of running an election during a pandemic, that happened at a provincial scale here in Canada a couple of different times. A couple of different provinces held elections.
Sure.
Here in BC, for sure.
Let's see, in BC, Horgan came back with even a stronger.
He did. And he got criticized for doing the pandemic thing.
Yeah, right.
But people were generally
yeah.
happy with I guess voters are generally happy with how the NDP in BC handled things.
And more specifically how Bonnie Henry and Adrian Dix handled things. And Horgan was smart to just get out of the way and let them do it.
Yeah, he had a few public flubs of things that he said where he criticized young people famously. People were not happy about that. There are a few things that he did, but that didn't seem to really hurt him that much. And
out east, there was an upset.
There was an incumbent government did lose
during the pandemic
election. Right? Was that Nova Scotia?
I believe so, yeah.
When the Conservatives won there. We should know this. If I'm going to bring it up, I should know. But
no, the Conservatives won there. No, that was a couple weeks ago. Or in pandemic time, several eons ago.
Sure. Well said. Yes. So, well, for our listeners, you know what I mean, and our readers, this is how we wrapped up also our live broadcast. We're going to have coverage. We'll have React. You know what I mean? Whether it's on the podcast, whether it's online. And we'll have a highlight reel of the live stream that we just completed for people if they want to see what we discussed, or maybe some of the feature interviews we did, because we did speak to 4 different stakeholders from the industry to kind of get some perspective from them on some of the issues in the election. So do stay tuned to all our social media channels and our website at DCNonl.com and JOCONL.com, and on Twitter and LinkedIn in particular for the Construction Record.
And on this particular podcast, we also have coming up next a quick hit with Alex Carrick, ConstructConnect's chief economist. So he's going to summarize all the different speakers on CanaData, which is coming September 28th and 29th, and that's up next right now. Hello, everyone. I'm Warren Frey, digital media editor for the Journal of Commerce and Daily Commercial News, and I have with me today
Alex Carrick, chief economist of ConstructConnect, the company that both you and I worked for.
Exactly, yes. And the reason we're getting here today is because of CanaData, the virtual this year and virtual last year conference, but for the past 30 odd years, not so virtual. So maybe that's a good jumping off point. So this is the second time we're doing a virtual conference. What do you think the takeaways were from the first, and how do you think we're going to move along with the second one?
Yeah, well, I think the first one, it was highly successful. I mean, we got our highest number of registrants ever. I think the first one concentrated more on technology. I think this one's going to be this one won't be a technology themed one, the same as what we did last year. It's a different world that we're emerging into. Now, the theme of the conference is accelerating your agility, because during the past 18 months, technological change has speeded up and so on. But I'm not sure that technology is really where the real story is in construction now. The story in construction is things like the big cost increases. I mean, that's been the headline, the big jumps in the price of forestry products. But it's not just forestry products, it's steel, aluminum, it's everything, really. The price has been going up dramatically. And then there's other things. There's other things that are going on that are fascinating, and they're going to determine what the construction marketplace is like. And the two that I guess I would really focus on is electrification and decarbonization.
And well, we have 2 different agendas. On day 1, it's the post-pandemic economic framework, and on day 2, it's reimagining the construction marketplace. Let's start with day 2, because it sounds like that's what you're talking about right now, is reimagining the construction marketplace.
Well, day 2, The first part of day 2 is a panel to look at one of the subjects that's been out there for a long time. Part of increasing construction costs is shortages.
Mhm.
And during the course of the 2-day sessions, we'll be talking about material input costs and shortages and so on. But there's also the long-standing issue that seems to have been made worse by the pandemic about labor shortages. Like every industry is talking about how they can't find workers. Workers seem to have decided that they want to reevaluate their lives. They've spent the last 18 months holed up in their houses, and certainly a lot of them have been able to work from home, but a lot of other people have reassessed really what their priorities are. And this is causing them not to jump at just every job that's available, or to think about changing from what they have been doing. So construction's going to have a problem that's going to be magnified. I mean, this was a problem before. Skilled workers, the availability of skilled workers, and so on. And of course, in the pandemic, a lot of older skilled workers saw the pandemic as sort of a sign that maybe now's the time to retire. So they've got to be replaced. So what do you do? What are the answers to this? And so that panel session, Bill Ferreira will be talking about the numbers, like just exactly what are the numbers that are required and so on. But then two obvious solutions are modular construction, and we have a terrific fellow will be speaking on that subject, Esposito, who, and I might say that Nadia and I, and Nadia is our conference coordinator, we talked to all the speakers at length, and all of them were just simply delightful to talk to on the phone. They were enthusiastic and they really knew their subject. So Henry was great to talk to. He's based out of Chicago, and he's been following the move towards modular construction, and he's got opinions as to how successful that's likely to be. Maybe that's not the way to say it. I think the way to say it is the whole trend towards construction becoming more like manufacturing. That's one of the answers to the labor shortage question. And of course, another one that's always talked about is trying to involve more women in construction. And the modular idea is part of that, because that certainly expands the labor pool. It's more attractive to be working indoors in winter, for example, and production is streamlined, that sort of thing. But our speaker on women in construction is Lindsey Kearns, and she's fabulous. Nadia and I really enjoyed our conversation with her. She knows about the opportunities that are out there in terms of the financial opportunities, and never mind the interest in work construction. And also, she was very, very clear about the things that would be inhibiting for women, but she's also she worked in construction, so she knows how to overcome some of those inhibitions. So I'm sure that she's going to be a terrific addition to the panel. And then the rest of the morning is David Coletto, who is an expert on societal trends. So he'll be talking about what we want coming out of the pandemic, along the lines of what are our choices going to be? Do we, and I talk about the collective we, do we want to live in downtown cores? Do we want to live in big cities? Or has the trend really shifted towards liking a more rural lifestyle, which is maybe fits in with what people want in terms of their work-life balance? And they didn't think they'd be able to achieve it, but some people have actually achieved that as one of the offshoots, one of the surprisingly good offshoots of the pandemic, if you can say anything good about the pandemic. And then The other speaker in the afternoon is second day afternoon is Mark Milk, who will be talking about a sector in Canada, and I'll be talking about this as well. My comments and his, I think, will be complementary. There's a sector of Canada that has been largely ignored and forgotten about over the last decade, and that has been resources. All the focus has been on high technology and office work and how we've all got to be doing writing software and all this sort of thing. But you got to understand how Canada really works. If you look at the trade statistics for Canadian raw materials, potash, I mean, obviously it's lumber and oil and gas and so on, but there's others, there's potash and aluminum and coal and so on. There's about a dozen key commodities, key raw materials that Canada has a trade surplus in. And if there's an increase in demand for raw materials and an increase in prices, that translates directly to gross domestic product.
Mm-hmm. Now, dialing back to day one, I'm not sure we are in a post-pandemic, but it says it's the post-pandemic economic framework. So maybe you could speak to both those things, the fact that the pandemic is still going, and also we do eventually have to look at a post-pandemic economic framework.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I mean, you go into this wanting to make the assumption that it's a post-pandemic world that we're entering, and you're keeping your fingers crossed, and then the variants and the fact that August had big climbs and infection rates and so on. Yeah, that's disturbing, and that's unfortunate. So there is that. And I think the forecasts that were made about GDP growth were quite optimistic. For the US, they were talking about 7%, and for Canada, 4 to 5% GDP growth. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if some of those forecasts are scaled back because of uncertainty related to COVID. But the first day, the speakers will be addressing the numbers and providing the numbers, the actual forecast numbers on the economy and construction markets. I mean, Peter Hall, we've had him speak a number of times from the Export Development Corporation, and he's always fabulous, and he brings a world perspective to what's going on, and he's usually optimistic. Usually, you find something to say that's quite positive, and then David Schoonjans, he'll be talking about some specific construction markets, type of structure markets like office buildings and light industrial and warehouse work and so on. But he'll also have a lot to say, I'm sure, about availability of materials and labor and what's going on in terms of costs as well. And then we have a speaker, Francisco. We'll be talking about commodity prices. And I always say that commodities are hugely important for construction. And people usually tend to focus on the negatives because they think that all construction materials have a commodity base. So when commodity prices go up, things that people in the industry wring their hands because that means higher prices, higher input prices. But there's another side to it. And I'll be talking about this a lot too. And that is that when you have higher commodity prices, this relates directly to that forgotten sector that I mentioned, which is resource development. And the owners of resources, if they know that they're getting more money and there's more demand for their product, then they initiate capital spending projects. And many of the biggest mega projects over all the years have been resource projects. So that's a real opportunity for the construction sector. Now, if I might say, the other thing that I will be talking about is electrification, because I'm speaking to. So I'll be talking about electrification and what that means, and of course, electrification that means demand for nickel and copper. batteries and for distribution lines and that sort of thing. And the other thing is the whole shift towards decarbonization and how that is going to impact the cost structure. It's I don't want to give things away before we get to the discussion, but it's kind of hard to see how you can push for decarbonization and what that means in terms of investments and different and new processes and so on, and how you can get costs down. So I think we're headed for a regime of higher costs. So that'll be what I'll be talking about.
I was just going to ask what you were going to talk about. So I guess you've already beat me to it. Any final thoughts on the conference?
Yeah. You've got to be there. I mean, this is this is not a normal cyclical recovery. Like, I don't know how many cycle recoveries I've been through, number. But this, you can't just assume that things are going to be the same this time coming out of a deep downturn. Last year was just horrible in terms of the statistics. It's not going to be the same. There's going to be a lot of shifts, and to be successful, you're going to have to be aware of what those shifts are.
Thanks to Alex Carrick, the Chief Economist at ConstructConnect, for joining us for that last quick hit before CanaData, which, by the way, if you'd like to register for it, it's on September 28th and 29th, and you can go to canada.constructconnect.com/CanaData/conference and register there. And if you'd like to hear more of TCR Express or our Friday podcast, you can listen to us on Spotify, Amazon Music, or Apple Music, or on the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce websites. Thanks, everybody.